On today's episode of the Swinburne Student Union podcast, I'll be chatting with James Murphy, author of The Life and Tragic Death of the Swinburne Student Union, and I'll be joined by regular co-host Tori to talk about the most recent council meeting. Coming up first though, we've got the news. Meteorologists are predicting intense flooding in Australia's east this weekend. Intense rain combined with a king tide will see flash flooding from Brisbane to Sydney. Anybody listening from the area is advised to take appropriate precautions. An independent report written by economists and water quality experts has predicted the cost of improving water quality and saving the Great Barrier Reef at $16 billion. In the May budget, the federal government pledged to spend an additional $171 million on the Great Barrier Reef, while the Labor government has pledged an additional $352 million. For a more detailed report, find a link in the episode description to the article published on the ABC. The 2016 Hunger Report shows that 1 in 6 Australians experienced exactly that over the past year. Foodbank, the largest organisation of its kind in Australia, says that they simply cannot keep up with the demand. A reminder that the Swinburne Student Union does have its own food bank located on the 4th floor of the UN building, if any student should need it. If you are able to donate to an organisation, it is sorely needed. Any amount donated is generous enough and all contributions are welcome. This week, the minimum wage has been increased by 2.4% to $17.70 an hour or $672.70 per week, an increase of 41 cents an hour or $15.80 a week. The Australian Council of Trade Unions Secretary David Oliver said to the ABC that the changes were welcome but do not go nearly far enough. And if any student is listening that does need financial aid, Swinburne does provide financial assistance in the form of planning and emergency loans. Join the Swinburne Student Union for only $20 a year. You'll get a diary with fantastic planners and important contacts, free lunch every Wednesday at our barbecues, discounted locker hire, and free printing in our office. We'll also look after your rights and the rights of your fellow students to make sure the university doesn't screw anybody over. Join now at our website ssu.org.au or go to our office on the 4th floor of the UN building just above the union-run bar, the Hammer and Swine. The Swinburne Student Union, student control of student affairs. Welcome to the Swinburne Student Union podcast. I'm your host and general representative, Jared. With me is welfare officer, Tori. Hello, Tori.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah, so a lot to cover today, actually, because we just had council yesterday, and it was a long one.
Oh yeah, we had to pass a motion to extend the length of the council meeting because otherwise we wouldn't have had enough time for everything.
Yeah, we were going on the 4th hour of council, and
it's not pleasant.
Oh, it's real draining. Let's get right down to what we talked about this council. So the queer department submitted their terms of reference, which gives the department a structure for how things will run inside of it. It makes the whole thing legitimized and recognized by the union. But there were a few problems with it, which meant that it couldn't be passed in council. Tori, what were they?
So there was one clause that implied that in order to make changes to the terms of reference, the SSU council would need a unanimous vote. This is dangerous because it means that if someone just wants to be a stick in the mud, they just don't vote. So you can have one single jerk on a council who doesn't want to go along and you've ruined everything. It's much, much better and more democratic if instead you have absolute majority. Because with an absolute majority, you can have a couple of people that disagree, but so long as a majority agree that the changes should be made, then that can be passed.
Yeah, and it means that the organization can update and change itself to the new times, basically. And that would be a problem for the queer department if they couldn't change anything. I submitted a motion to council, which passed. I'm very happy with it. Basically, it's just about the government's PATH program. For anybody on the dole has to find an internship placement, and that can be really short, and they get no job security, and it's very low wages for what work you're doing, and it's not great policy in my opinion, and the National Union of Students agrees. They are running a campaign against it and awareness stuff, so posters, information, and petitions are being circulated, but the union, the Swinburne Student Union, couldn't follow along because we didn't have policy around this. So we're going to now be circulating that information that the NUS produces. We're going to be in line with, we'll be in line with all the other student unions across the country in solidarity. Should be noted, Caitlin, president of the student union here, really wanted to make it very clear that though she does agree with the policy, she voted to run with the NUS's welfare campaign, which was very strange because
She was voting in line with what she believes the union's values are as opposed to her own personal values. And that's an important thing for a union president to do.
yeah, it's very grown up of her.
Yeah. Something valuable you don't normally see in student politics.
Yeah. We have a financial delegation policy that it was not passed. So this stuff is really complicated. We as a student union need to make sure that all of our budgets are done and clear and that we're not misspending our money. So this financial policy was supposed to put in procedures and checks to make sure that nobody overspends and funds don't get misused. However, this policy was submitted in an incomplete form. Tori, what was wrong with it?
So there were quite a few things wrong with it, actually. It was misworded. It referred to collectives instead of committees, and the union doesn't actually recognize collectives. It only recognizes committees. It didn't define what it meant by a committee. It referred to a now defunct meeting type that no longer occurs in the student union.
But by far, the most problematic thing was...
Basically, it meant that if you wanted to spend more than $100 of the budget for your department as an elected representative, you needed to go to a committee. If you don't have a committee associated with your department, it didn't say what you had to do, the implication being maybe you should form a committee. This means that if someone wants to, say, continue with any of the services that they currently provide, they would need to stop what they were doing, form a committee, which would take a lot of time and potentially couldn't be done depending on whether or not you could find the student interest in being on those committees.
Yup.
And then you needed to hold a meeting, a minuted, structured, proper meeting, in which the committee voted to accept the spending of that $100 or more.
Yeah, so big problems, introducing a lot of bureaucracy that would slow down the union's progress and momentum. So things like last year when the bookshop co-op wanted to wind down the on-campus bookshop, the union jumped in, produced a whole lot of information, distributed it very fast, and stacked the AGM so that the bookshop wouldn't close. And that wouldn't happen if a committee had to form to vote, yes, we're going to produce information, pamphlets, and generate student awareness about this issue. because there was a day to produce this stuff.
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to, structure a meeting, have a proper minuted meeting when your requirements are usually that you promote the meeting to all of the people who are supposed to be at the meeting, a week in advance.
Yeah. So, and then as soon as this information was brought to the light of the mover and seconder, Caitlin and Brendan, they immediately dropped it because they realized how bad the implications of this are. A procedural was introduced because this is still policy we need. Like, we need to lay out what budgets look like and how they should be conducted, and that information then needs to be conveyed to reps at their induction. But the rest of the financial policy probably don't need, like, it's a lot more bureaucracy than is needed. Hopefully the president and general secretary will go back, rewrite this policy so that it's actually good, and then we can pass it in council next time we meet, which will be on the 20th of June. Okay, Tori, that's all we've got time for today. In fact, we've gone a little bit over. I think there's good stuff there. Find a link to the full minutes from yesterday's meeting in the show description. This is the Swinburne Student Union podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Share this podcast around in your Facebook feeds. That word of mouth stuff really helps getting the word out. Thanks again so much for listening. Now I'm joined by James Murphy, author of The Life and Tragic Death of the Swinburne Student Union. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Happy to be here.
I suppose I should first ask you what you started studying at Swinburne.
I started doing a degree in politics. I did a minor in philosophy and a minor in economics. I don't think it was a minor in philosophy, actually. I ended up doing general studies, quote unquote, because I wanted to go around and choose whatever it was I wanted to do and make the most out of my degree while I was here. And so I ended up mixing and matching and I did a unit in climate change, which is an engineering subject that they don't offer anymore.
Interesting. And are you still studying politics now?
Yes, so I'm doing a PhD. I'm about 9 months into a PhD on... Actually, I'm looking at East-West Link for that. So that's a whole other political kettle of fish, but you can kind of tell that I am quite interested in sort of local-ish history. So it was sort of a natural progression from doing my university to doing something in my town.
Well, let's talk about your honours thesis. When naming it, did you consider spoiler warnings at all?
No, I didn't, no. For a time, I was the editor of this student magazine as well. Maybe it's a hangover from that time, but I'm a hack for a juicy headline, I guess, and I wanted something that would get people in.
No, it's really an evocative title.
I get really sick and annoyed with academic kind of sounding titles and academic language. It's a real barrier, and I want to invite people into it and get people interested. And
honestly, that comes through in your writing. It was a really good read. But how did you decide to write about the SSU?
I spent a little while thinking about what would be a good thesis for my honours. I knew I wanted to do honours, but it was a question of what on. I had been a little bit involved in the student union. So, as I said, I was the editor of The Swine for like a year or a bit less than. Just when they'd started rebooting it, actually, it had kind of been dragged up from the grave. I was just kind of really interested by it. I spent time thinking about it, about the student union and how it got into the position it was in kind of in my own time. I'm a politics nerd, so this is the kind of thoughts that go through my head. And trying to piece all that together. And I thought, hey, if I'm thinking about this all the time anyway, why don't I just make that's the best kind of thing to make your thesis. You should study what you're already naturally interested in. It kind of gives you this fuel to keep going.
So the thesis covers the union from its inception up until its implosion in the mid-2000s. How did you piece all that together? What did you have to do to get all that information?
Well, I did a lot of archival research. So I spent a few weeks in the basement of Swinburne Library, where they still have, I don't know if they still do at the time, they had copies of the student magazine going right back for, I reckon, till, if not the 70s, I think they had magazines going back to the 80s, and I kind of found my cast of characters and got a little bit of a feel for what was going on when. I spent far too long going through SSU archives, which were just a complete mess. I remember walking up the stairs into the student offices, and it was like a wall of bookshelves and cupboards with just crap all over the place, totally out of order, totally random collection of stuff. And it took me just so long to find what was relevant and where it belonged. So I kind of almost did a little bit of free refiling for them. So yeah, please, future Swinburne Student Union reps, keep your records in order so that future historians know what you've done. So that was a mess. But aside from that, I also did interviews with people. And that was where I got a lot of the great stories and where I discovered a lot of great characters.
Writing a thesis is really different from a lot of other writing that you have to do at university. What was that like for you?
It's quite a learning curve working out how to piece together an original history on which nothing had really been written before. And it can cause you a lot of anguish working out what to put in the story and to decide, yeah, that's a part of the narrative that I'm trying to piece together, and what to omit. And when omitting stuff that you're saying, yeah, but that doesn't matter because this is what mattered, when it's legitimate to do that, and when you're kind of cutting out important information that you should be considering. So that was quite complicated.
Was anybody upset with what you wrote or what you omitted?
There was some people who were quite cross with what I wrote. One of the learning curves of doing this was it kind of ends up that all the people you're interviewing become stakeholders in what you're writing, and you give them opportunities to kind of read what you've written about them so that they can respond to stuff. And you have to sort of manage people and their expectations and keep people happy, but not change things too much to kind of not be accurate. And I had early drafts that people were like, you can't write that about me. That is not right. Various people, not one person in particular, various people were cross. And then the other thing was there were people who I didn't get the chance to interview, which was a real shame because they were really important people, and I had things that I kind of found out about them and their role in the student union that probably should have had them responding to that so that I could kind of maybe have a bit more of a balanced picture. So that piece of work is lacking for that.
So we know from your thesis that the reason the SSU imploded was a perfect storm of disasters. So what would your advice to students who want to get involved be so that this doesn't happen again?
I sort of had a little bit of advice towards the end of it, which I've had really interesting conversations with people who've been involved in the union since. Mates of mine who kind of say, love the thesis, but we disagree with what you say about X, Y, and Z, which is great. My advice is it's really important to build up a sense of community on campus. I think it's more important at this stage where the union finds itself, it's more important to build up community than it is to fight a really strong political campaign on conditions or broader political campaigns targeting the government or something like that. I think more important at this point is to work on student sense of community, work on solidarity on campus, and stuff like, I know that these days the union owns the student bar. It didn't even used to own the student bar. It barely put on events. So stuff like that, having a good social scene on campus, keeping people interested on staying on campus when they're done with class, that just makes a massive difference. And I think that you're limited in what you can do at a higher political level if you don't have that basic kind of social scene on campus.
Fantastic answer, James. My last question for you is the same I ask all my guests. What makes you happiest?
Solving puzzles. Yeah. And so my thesis was trying to solve a puzzle. And the work I'm doing now is trying to solve a puzzle. But even smaller bits and pieces, I get a kick out of solving a puzzle. That's what makes me feel happy.
Need a post-lecture pick-me-up? Grab a fair trade coffee from the Croydon Cafe. Hungry? The cafe also serves affordable, great quality home-cooked meals. The Croydon Cafe, run by students, for students. Thanks again to James for coming in to talk to me today. A reminder that you can read James's thesis, The Life and Tragic Death of the Swinburne Student Union, on the Swine Magazine website, swinemagazine.org.au. That's all the show we've got for you this week. Share this podcast around with your friends. We'll be back next week with more Swinburne Student Union podcast.